All right, welcome everybody, one and all. Class number 3 of Buddhist Psychology that we're doing here. So before we get into a little bit of a review of last week, I just want to um, kind of, I guess, open my brain so you can kind of understand a little bit of what I'm doing here. So I had an idea of the class, but I kept it open, wanted to get a chance and opportunity to meet all of you, which I've been very much enjoying. And so getting a little bit of feedback from people about what their interests, their curiosity, their motivations for taking this class. Some people, they're coming from the view that they would like to understand a little bit of kind of like early traditional Buddhism and kind of get that lens. Some people are reflecting back that they are mental health professionals and they're kind of interested in somewhat of the clinical application of some of the Buddhist psychology. And some people that they're just down for just the straight up Abhidhamma. They want to understand some of the early chunky list dense Abhidhammic concepts and such. So I've been kind of retooling this with a bit of that, I guess, 3-tiered structure of the conversation. So it's kind of a bit of my challenge here that I'm kind of dancing back and forth trying to speak on those particular 3 levels. They're not in conflict per se at all. And I find it quite interesting myself. But having said that, let's get into the blackboard a little bit here. I think I found it right there. Okay. Let me get rid of a couple extraneous things here. Okay, here we go. Buddhist Psychology, number 3 of 6. So when you go to the YouTube, the thumbnails for the videos pertaining to this class will have this type of look to it. So that's the little brand identification there. So as I was saying before, 3 levels of conversations: foundational Buddha Dharma. So sometimes I might put the BD code next to something, Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma, what does that mean? I'm a Buddhist meditation teacher. I've been instructed upon how to teach the early teachings of the Buddha as I understand them, as it comes through this particular lens of this particular personality and mind body as I understand it in a little bit more of a contemporary languaging. But still, I try to have an attempt to go back to some of the early teachings to try to get close to what is the intention, what is some of the early intention and application of these teachings. And then sometimes, again, as I said, there might be a little bit more of a clinical lens. So I might put that CL next to something. How is it that this can be adapted into the contemporary environment of clinicians, mental health professionals, trying to either engage this with a client or within their own self-care as they are engaging in their work. And then the traditional Abhidhamma. How is it that we can really kind of go into that particular languaging? So you might see those 3 codes there, the BD, CL, ABD. That's what that means. So reviewing from last week, for those that might have missed or can benefit from a review, citta, that was the concept that we were looking at. The tagline that I like that comes from this book here, again, highly recommended. The original Buddhist Psychology, Beth Jacobs, PhD. She does a very good job of sifting through all of the Abhidhammic teachings and putting them in some contemporary, accessible languaging. So one of the ways that she talks about citta is consciousness in transit touching anything. Yeah? So we did a meditation last week where we were hanging out in various sense gates of mind and body and just exploring the activity of citta. So there's the awareness, contacting the object of focus, and just moment by moment, it's just this activity of mind, activity of consciousness that's happening, that mapping together this experience that gives us rise to the sensory experience, that gives rise to the sense of self and world. So it's a rather, as they can say, like within a given moment, there's like 100,000 cheetahs taking place. Yeah, in the context of using this word. So all these different ways, non-linearly, that the mind is kind of mapping together this experience of self and world. So this was one thing we were looking at, the Abhidhammic term of citta. I was also looking at the three trainings as a progressive understanding. So I was looking at the Eightfold Path, and how should we say, how is it that we can look at the different path factors of speech, action, livelihood, and how that compels us to a deeper state of inner reflection, of cultivating our inner mindfulness, right concentration, and right effort, and how that inclines us towards having the wisdom capacity to really deeply understand the intention that we have in each moment and view, rather than the self view of being deeply identified with our suffering and unwholesome mental states, towards really having the view of, well, the Four Noble Truths occurring in each moment. In each moment, there's a sense of dukkha that arises, some sense of imperfection in the moment. Yeah? And how is it that we handle that? Is that something that we are clearly aware of and can see, or is that something that we tighten up and turn away from? And subconsciously, on some sense gate, we struggle against it and fixate on it, and then it begins to fester and ferment from there into some reactive behavior, some unskillful habit pattern, some triggering just some ego state related to displeasure, discontent, and distress. So how is it that we can clearly see the discontent in each moment, be able to be clear about it, on what sense gate it arises, how is it that we're experiencing it sensorially, and understand its origin. How is it that it's coming to be? And our understanding of how it comes to be facilitates the passing away from it, that cessation of dukkha, so to speak. Yeah? So this is the view that we're trying to cultivate here. So we're moving from the identification of the suffering self towards the cultivation of certain skills and ideals. Yeah? So kind of looking at it this way, the practice. We're cultivating skill sets that's moving us towards, well, realizing and embodying certain ideals within the practice. So some of the goals is the disidentification, or the breaking our identification of self from the suffering experience, and cultivating and supporting certain skill sets. So to review a little bit, or maybe I touched upon this a little bit last week, but I want to go into it a little bit more. Some people, it was reflected last week, some people are coming from a secular mindfulness background, where there might have just been generally a usage of the term mindfulness without really kind of going into some of the older historical practices. So I want to review what I refer to, or essentially what I'm going to be looking at here in terms of the foundational early Buddhist mindfulness practices. Yeah, so they would be the shamatha practices, the Vipassana practices, and Metta practices. Of course, there are more, but for the sake of the conversation that we're having in this class, I wanted to kind of reduce it to those. And of course, it was brought up last week, somebody, or the week before, the existing of the Vipassana and shamatha. So shamatha, let's take a look at that. What does that mean? So BD, the Buddha Dharma, that's the calm abiding. So we're cultivating the calm abiding. We can look at it as certain practices, but really how it's meant in the early Pali Canon is it's qualities of mind. There are practices that can facilitate a shamatha effect, shamatha within the body, a shamatha within the mental state. So a calm abiding. One facet that I find very true and a tangible litmus test of really how it's going. Sorry, I'm smiling because I'm being visited by our friendly neighborhood possum, Frederick. This is the time he comes out. Resolving of urgency. So anytime there's a sense of discontent or a problem, there's urgency comes with it. Oh no, I have to fix this. I have to do this. Yeah. Whenever we're in a suffering state, whenever we're in a state of distress, there's urgency that comes with that. Yeah. Oh no, things are not going to be right until I resolve this. Yeah. So the shamatha is like about how is it that we can go into this mind body experience and just pull out that linchpin of urgency. So maybe the problem is not necessarily gone circumstantially, but our urgent hair on fire reactivity is gone. Yeah. And what's left is the mind just coming to a place of settling. So this is part of the idea in Buddhist psychology is that's the mind's natural state, is this calm abiding. So looking at shamatha through the clinical lens, well, this is cultivating a sense of self-soothing. And we can look at it through the lens of deep regulation, deep self-regulation. And sometimes I like to look at it as resource building. Given, I like to say sometimes, given if we give ourselves 30 seconds to 3 minutes, we could probably work ourselves into a lather of frustration, anger, rage, and despair at what's taking place in the world. But given that same amount of time, can we cultivate deep states of calm abiding, deep states of joy, deep states of relaxation, contentment, peace? Yeah. So part of the shamatha is how is it that we can actually access and cultivate some of these deeper resources that would actually be really good to have available. And through the Abhidhammic lens, shamatha practice, the benefit of it is we're cultivating beautiful mental factors. Yeah. So that term mental factors, that's what we're going to be leaning into today, what that means, the Cetaskias. Yeah. So moving on to the next traditional practice, Vipassana, early Buddhism, Buddha Dharma. So that's the insight practice, Vipassana. Gives us insight into what? I mean, especially when we're talking about mental health, insight has a particular definition to it already that can get a little, they can trip up on each other. We can get insights into our personality, our habits, and why we're doing what we're doing. Traditionally, the insight is into the three characteristics. That means dukkha, anicca, anatta. So how is it that we can gain insight into the nature of discontent that arises? How is it, again, as I was talking about the Four Noble Truths, what is it that we're engaging in that's fueling the discontent? How is it that we can relate to it that can quell the discontent? Second characteristic, anicca, or impermanence. The way that I like to look at it is this pragmatic directive model. Dukkha. Find where that dukkha is. Where is the discontent? How am I experiencing it? Is it emotional? Is it just like a tactile sensation in the body? Is it some sort of obsessive mental state that's triggering a compulsive reaction? How is it that I'm experiencing the dukkha in the moment? If I can clearly see it on the sense gate that it's occurring in, and how it's triggering the other sense gates to align and motivate, then I can see how I'm fixating around it, and in relinquishing that grasp, that impulse can return back to the effortless flow of nature. So then impermanence, flow can begin to express itself, and in so doing, to whatever degree I was identified with it, that self-identification begins to peel away, and it's like, oh, it's that thing that's happening. It's not really me. It's not really the core of my experience. I can kind of allow that to fade. So that's kind of what's meant really traditionally by the insight. Now then, in terms of clinically, well, yeah, it gives us some tools to really sharpen our ability for self-introspection, for processing and digesting of like held karmic material. How is it that we can fully experience something and let it go as well? In the Abhidhammic lens, we are training ourselves to deconstruct this sense of I am that's born of fixation on unwholesome mental factors. Again, mental factors, we're going to be looking at that. Of course, earlier on, we were talking a little bit about the dovetailing together Vipassana and shamatha, how if we can allow ourselves to get into a calm abiding, then as the material comes up, we can have this non-reactivity to it. That just can allow the activity to happen so that we're not kind of grasping it and kind of making a thing out of it, so to speak. So ideally, they talk about the wings of awakening, so to speak, of the Vipassana and Samatha working together. And then, of course, there's the Metta practices. Buddha Dharma, there's the sense of really the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes. These are mental, emotional states that we can cultivate of deep, boundless expressions of kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. And of course, on the clinical level, well, can we cultivate non-afflictive experiences towards self and other? Yeah, rather than, oh, that person is having some success. Oh, I'm feeling some jealousy there. Well, that is creating like a blockage that's cultivating this inner toxicity, and that might trigger some other unwholesome responses, unskillful responses. If we practice the sympathetic joy, allowing ourselves to participate in the joy of others, we're reducing some afflictive impulses or habits we may have. So how is it that we can cultivate non-afflictive responses towards the pleasant, unpleasant, towards self and others? And then again, the Abhidhammic quality is we're again cultivating beautiful mental factors that we'll be getting into. So Shamatha, Vipassana, Metta. As you can see, I'm very much about the meditation practices themselves. This is what gives us really the understanding. This is how we build the skill sets for understanding Abhidhamma. This is how we build the skill sets that become available in order to realize what is being asked of us in order to take up this path of the Dharma, to really move towards awakening. I consider myself a liberation-oriented teacher. The teachings that the Buddha gave us are guiding us, moving us towards that process and experience of waking up. So since it was brought up a little bit last week, and I said that I wanted to focus a little bit more explicitly on the clinical considerations. So I want to look at this natural dovetailing of Dharma and some goals within the office there. So as always, for some people, this is review. For others, this is new. So for people that this is review, reflect upon how you have thus grown and your wisdom and understanding has deepened since last you've reviewed this material. And if you'd like to get a little bit more into it, 2 series ago, I think it's mindfulness and emotional intelligence, I was also covering this material there. So if you want to do a little homework on your own, that series supports a lot of what we're doing here too. So Pierre Janet, pioneering French psychologist, physician, philosopher, etc., one of the early forefathers of looking at how to work with trauma. Hey, did anybody ever notice that sometimes people go through a horrendous experience and afterwards they're different? Afterwards, they're experiencing life differently and they're struggling with it. So the early beginnings of how to work with this idea of trauma. So although I'd like to talk a little bit about the trauma, but there's something about this 3-stage model of treatment that I think can be somewhat universal towards, again, working with the client, the clinician working with their own experience, or as well, just a person who has absolutely no clinical interest, but just their own human being just undergoing these practices. So the 3-stage model of working with trauma: safety. How is it that this nervous system that has been driving around for so long with one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brakes, experiencing this activation of fight, flight, freeze response, that is having the sense of that experience is occurring again now? How is it that that nervous system can come to a place of rest, can stabilize, can gain a sense of regulation? This is something that it would be good for people to be able to have if they're seeking treatment or healing from trauma. And as well, if a client is coming into the office, it would be good for them to be able to have those skill sets. And then, of course, once the individual is able to demonstrate their ability to stabilize themselves and have a sense of calm, well, maybe we can begin looking at doing some processing. How is that the person can explore some of their inner content, be able to identify what are the triggers, identify some of the core problems and experiences to be processed or looked at, and be able to engage in that processing. Yeah. And so there's a little distress tolerance that the individual needs to have, and also the tools to be able to look inwardly and kind of see what's going on. Yeah. And well, this third stage, integration, the rehabilitation of personality. Sometimes the way it makes sense to me is great that we can reprocess some of that trauma. Great that we can let go of some of those very limiting beliefs and things that kind of hold us back. But in some weird way, they're also contributing to some structural integrity of the personality. So there might be kind of some holes there within us in a way. What is it that we can rehabilitate? What features or factors, skillful aspects of ourselves can we really cultivate to kind of fill that in, and kind of how is it that we can train ourselves to respond differently to abiding in the world? So of course it's more complex than that, but just as a general overview of this three-stage trauma treatment model. So now then, if we look here, comparing this three-tier trauma treatment to early Buddhist practices, on one hand, it seems like the three-stage model is kind of a theoretical directive. It's like, oh, this would be good to do A, B, and C. How do you do it? It's good work if you can get it. It feels to me that there's this correlation that the mindfulness practices are a functional kind of how-to tools. Yeah. So stage one, safety, stabilization, calm, regulation. Well, compare that to the concentration, the shamatha practices. Well, we're having the stabilization, the calm, the regulation. Yeah. So engaging in these shamatha practices helps build actual skill sets, tools to be able to cultivate that within a person. Moving into the processing, there's the exploration, identification, the processing, the insight practice. We're cultivating these tools of inner investigation, discernment of what is occurring in each moment on the different sensory fronts, and being able to process, digest, metabolize some of the held deep karmic habit patterns. Of course, the integration, the rehabilitation of personality, working with the heart practices. How is it that we can cultivate altruistic states at baseline experience? Rewiring one's response to the pleasant and unpleasant stimulus so they can abide in the world in a different way. So there's something about whether you're the clinician, whether you're considering the needs, goals, and objectives of the client, or if you're just a regular civilian who's just interested in getting into this practice. These are some of the practical skills that are cultivated by engaging in these early practices of concentration, insight, and heart practice, or the shamatha, vipassana, and metta. So I just wanted to bring that up. So again, either when working on one's own self in meditation or engaging mindfulness with a client, it's recommended to start off with the...
Hi, can I say something?
Yeah, Swati.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, what you just said, I totally agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
That mindfulness practices gives us the methodology or the how-to of, you talked about the 3 stages of trauma. But even outside of that, when we talk about non-attachment or non-identification, it is one thing to say it in theory, but how do you actually practice it? How do you internalize it? And mindfulness practices really gives us the methodology to do that. And that's, so I'm just totally agreeing with what you just said.
Good. I'm glad it's resonating and that you're finding it relevant to you personally in all the different realms that you work in. Yeah. I worked for a number of years in different, how shall we say, drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. So they're residential. So there was kind of a benefit to the clients waking up in the morning, and then we would, or I would lead them through the guided meditations, working on these specific skill sets. And so people that are coming in with, ravaged nervous systems, just coming off of, being dependent on various chemicals and processes, they're left with this, body that is drying out and feeling horrible, coming in off of probably, was probably their bottom, their worst moments in their lives. And what's surfacing is a lot of the underlying trauma that they were probably initially trying to self-medicate so they wouldn't have to suffer, because there was an absence of other tools available. So I found that it was just very, very helpful for people to just begin to kind of soothe themselves and just kind of learn to be okay, learn to kind of accept, learn to work with a lot of the turmoil in the heart. And then, entering in and really working with the shamatha and the metta practices in particular was really helping these individuals get to a place where they're able to, gain a little bit of more distress tolerance and be able to then go in and get into some of the
I have a question about that. When you say distress tolerance, I find that especially the type of clientele you're talking about, if there is a lot of distress, it is hard to just go to samatha practice as the first step, because it actually comes, all the pain and suffering comes back in a stronger way. So I have always thought about, or I've done mostly metta work in the beginning with these people to turn them towards the positive aspects of life, and then concentration, which is not something that's traditionally, I understand it's not traditionally recommended. It's the samatha practice goes first, but I find metta practice to be very useful with people who have a lot of distress.
I absolutely agree, and have found that also to be the case with a lot of people. Of course, it's it's all a case by case scenario. Everybody's different, but in the different locations that I worked at that were open to amenable and implemented a mindfulness itinerary to varying degrees, it seemed like a lot of people that were experiencing a lot of distress responded well to the metta practice as an initial kind of foothold or handle onto the mindfulness practices. Good, thank you for that reflection.
Michael, can I ask a question? Well, thank you so much. Can you tell me what you mean by karmic habit patterns?
Yeah, karmic habit patterns. Yeah, so I guess that would be like a how should we say, that would be like a Buddhist lens view of maybe what we would refer to as, let's say somebody has an impulse control problem. Oh, I feel frustration, I reach for the bottle. Boom, there's that wiring that's taken place of that type of obsessive compulsive behavior that could also happen. Any type of habit patterns that we have of perception and behavior that's really kind of locked around some, discrete suffering, that we can begin to inspect. So one of the things we'll be going into probably in the next class is really looking at unpacking, what does that mean? The karmic patterns, karmic habit patterns of suffering. Is that what it said up there? Processing karmic habit patterns. Yeah. I know that Thich Nhat Hanh, I believe that him and the Sangha and culture around that, they'll talk about habit energy. Yeah. So even the habit energy, if I'm going to meditate and my self-critical judging voice comes in, that's a particular habit pattern. That's a particular habit energy that comes in. I'm going and I'm going to do something and I feel really good about it. And then boom, there's this wave of doubt that comes up. It's very subtle. It's very discreet, happens in just a moment, but it totally just kind of puts a wet blanket of everything. That's just a discrete karmic habit pattern that happens.
Thank you. So why the word karmic? Help me understand. I know habit patterns and I know personality patterns, but what do you mean when you use the word karmic to describe these?
Sure. All right. We'll go into that a little bit more next week. But karma, the way that it's used old school in Buddhism, just means action. So action, there's a doing, there's an action. But they really look at the action. Well, what's the intention behind the action? What's the act itself? And then what's the fruit of that action? What does it set up? And it's like when we engage in a particular act and it has a particular outcome, it has a tendency to make us more inclined to do that act again. Yeah. So in a way, it kind of repeats over and over. So let's just say, in that example, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I don't know what to do. Oh, I have a drink. My stress goes down a little bit. The brain's like, oh, I should pay attention to that. And then the wiring of those two activities happen. In a way, that's kind of creating this kind of, through the Buddhist lens, like a karmic knot is happening. It's just, stimulus and response. Nervous system found something that worked for it by soothing, although it's ultimately, as it grows in intensity, frequency, and duration, it creates a lot more destruction. It still talks to this repetitive habit pattern. And we have some degree of willfulness and intention in the beginning, but as time goes on through the repetition, it just becomes this deeper, well-worn groove that our sense of choice becomes less and less. And it's just a habit pattern that's just going on unconsciously. So on a gross level of like, all right, my drinking's getting out of control, to that subtle, discrete level of this very, very wispy kind of self-critical voice that happens that, I cringe. And then, at the same time, I validate it and listen to it. That creates the conditions for it to come up again and for me to respond to it again. So karmic habit pattern in that sense is like there's an action that happens that creates the conditions for it to come up again, and our sense of choice around it, awareness around it, begins to diminish. Yeah. Does that resonate, or does that sound?
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Yeah, cool. All right, we'll go a little bit more into that next week. Okay. So,
I'm sorry, Michael, I have one question. In this context, is samatha and samadhi essentially interchangeable?
Let's see. Samatha and samadhi, are they interchangeable? Not necessarily, though they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So shamatha is cultivating the qualities of practice that bring the sense of calming to the mind. And so that's shamatha. But then when we talk about samadhi, deep states of concentration, like in the form of jhana, it's just like the shamatha leads into the jhana, so they talk about the shamatha jhanas. They also talk about like the metta jhanas, the vipassana jhanas. So the shamatha quality definitely is this calm abiding that can lead to samadhi, like a very deep state of concentration. So they're different terms, but they're very, very closely related for sure.
Okay. And yeah, because one's more soothing and one's more concentrated, but one supports the other.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So when we're in that classical kind of deeply concentrated state in meditation, there's something about it that's very restful, very joyful, very pleasant. Yeah. So there's all those qualities for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you for these excellent questions, everybody. Really, really appreciate everybody engaging the material. Right, where do we leave off? I think we're there. Okay, let's get into some things here. We'll just jump ahead here. Okay, so let's get into the Abhidhammic languaging a bit. So mental factors, that's a term that I used variously thus far today. So Cetasika, that's the Pali terminology. Sometimes it's translated in the early Buddhist texts as the mental factors. So again, last week when we were looking at the citta, so that the citta is kind of the building block of the mental experience. It's just any activity of mind, consciousness, processing, contacting, interpreting, perceiving, all of the various nonlinear ways that the mind is working in different directions that tends to map together and give a sense of continuity of this experience of self and world. Like all of those little activities on this atomic level, citta that's happening. So we're looking at, for example, eye consciousness, this awareness that individuates into seeing. I'm looking at the light. I'm aware of the light object. I'm aware of the awareness. I'm aware of the contact, all the peripheral awareness. I mean, that's all different activities of citta that's mapping together this activity of seeing. Yeah. So if we're looking at kind of the atomic level, well, let's just go into the quote here. So this is the quote from, again, plugging her book, the original Buddhist Psychology. Beth Jacobs goes on to say, at this point, the entire complexity of the citta is moving into a new, also complex context. We're moving from the study of the atom in the chemistry analogy to the study of molecules. Every spell check does not like the word citta. Every citta occurs nestled in a bed of supporting and enabling factors called cetasikas, pronounced Cetaskias. Cetasikas are mental qualities that are more psychologically recognizable to us than any tiny unit of a citta event. They include emotions, ethical capacities, types of intelligence, and mental skills. So with the Cetasikas, that's kind of, or the mental factors, we can use those terms interchangeably. That kind of becomes the umbrella term for a lot of just these mental emotional states. So we can look at kind of the different emotions that we experience as Cetasikas, or as the different mental factors that occur. We can look at states of concentration, lack of concentration, just the efficaciousness or ways of mind might be resistant as also mental factors. Just ways of how we're experiencing this mind body. This is also another quote from the book. Cetasikas are the subcontractors of cognition. So when we look at what's going on inside ourselves, and we can get a sense of, well, what is it? What is happening? I've got a little bit of this kind of mild anticipatory trepidation that's happening here. I've got this other pressure there. Is that an expression of anxiety that's giving me these chest things? Is that kind of a heart attack working? Maybe it's indigestion. All the different things that we're experiencing and trying to process and give perception around. So that's kind of the citta and the cetasikas working together that kind of become kind of the ingredients of how we're experiencing this sense of self.
Michael?
Yeah.
So I was thinking, and tell me if this sounds right or not. So our mind is wearing glasses, which are our perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And the glasses have different colors or different lens, and those are like the chittas.
Mm-hmm.
So what the color of the glass we are wearing, that decides what our perception is showing to us. So it's the color of the glasses. And cetasikas are like the material we use to tinge the glasses.
Mm-hmm. The materials we use to tinge the glasses. That's interesting.
So it could be any metal or anything that we use to give the color or the tinge to the glass.
Yeah. So if I got my glasses that are all the different unwholesome mental states, having this grim, dour look, I'll have my glasses that's tinged by all the wholesome or beautiful mental factors, and that's giving me a different perception. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I like that a lot. Very, very cool. Thank you for the analogy, because these analogies definitely help kind of sell or communicate the spirit of.
Yeah, because it is, I think, a little abstract to understand the relationship between chittas and cetasikas.
For sure.
That's what I find.
For sure. Yeah. Eric, did you have another question?
Yeah, if you go back to your slide, please.
Of course. Yes.
The citta flitting about mapping entire experience. What are you saying on the up the citta as a building block? Citta.
At this point, the complexity of the citta.
Above the quote.
Oh, citta flitting about mapping the entire experience. Yes.
What is flitting?
Flitting. Well, let's see. My understanding of flitting is kind of like a Adderall infused moth around a light bulb, just this way that it's kind of flying and just kind of everywhere all at once, that's somehow kind of knitting together this experience. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very cool. Okay, so let's go with Swati's analogy there of the different glasses. So here's the 52 mental factors at a glance. This is coming from Bhikkhu Bodhi's comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. So there's different categories. We have the universal mental factors: contact, feeling, perception, volition. We can get into that when we look at dependent origination. Occasional ones: initial application, sustained application, decision, energy, zest, desire. So when it was asked about samadhi and jhana, these would be like different kind of mental factors that would kind of arise when we get into deeper states of concentration. We have unwholesome universals. So that, the glasses that I'm looking through, oh, the unwholesome universals. Oh, well, now I'm really aware of the delusion or the shamelessness, fearlessness of wrong, restlessness. These are mental factors that are having some unpleasant, unskillful manifestations in the mind and body. Going over here to the beautiful universals, I'll focus a little bit on this today in the spirit of metta and shamatha. So beautiful universals: faith, mindfulness, shame. I don't know about shame so much as like kind of the guilt in the sense of, hey, I missed the mark. I just acted outside of my ethical value system, and I kind of feel bad about that. That's a motivational factor to get back in line with my ethics, to get back in integrity. I think that's the spirit that's being looked at there, or attempted to be communicated there. The fear of wrong. So a lot of like early Buddhism is looking at, well, yeah, what are behaviors, perceptions that we can refrain from? So there's this a lot of like abstinence or self-restraint, that's alive there. Non-greed, non-hatred, neutrality of mind, tranquility of the mental body, tranquility of consciousness, lightness, malleability, wieldiness. So these are kind of qualities that can be definitely cultivated in shamatha and metta, so to speak. So the non-hatred would be the kindness, neutrality of mind would be the equanimity factor, and of course, compassion and appreciative joy. I think that these are different, those metta qualities. We can have equanimity and kindness towards self or towards no object at all. It can be a beautiful universal factor, but I think the classical compassion for other or appreciative joy for other, that's something that can happen upon the occasion when we're aware of other. So as you can see, it's quite a, from the unpleasant things that kind of look a lot like the 7 deadly sins here, the greed, wrong view, conceit, etc. But, these are all different expressions that give us a sense of the mental factors. So here's the part of the idea of why I feel that it's relevant. As you were saying, Swati, a lot of this is very abstract. Why bother? Why know this? So I think a lot of the idea, the intention, how I find it relevant is just as the baker is able to taste the pastry or the chef is able to taste the soup, and because of their expertise cultivated within their palate, they're able to say, oh yes, way too much of this ingredient, not enough of this ingredient. What do we add to the soup here to balance that out? And they have the knowledge, the expertise, the capacity for discernment, and the ability to influence and change the overall experience of what they're creating. The practical expression of really looking into this, how to apply the Abhidhammist view is, can we, just like the baker or the chef, have that ability in tasting this experience of mind and body? I'm just kind of turning the camera 180 degrees around right now, and I'm looking, and it's like, yeah, a little bit too much anxiety to be comfortable. I could see how that's creating a little bit of aversion, creating a little bit of defensiveness, and there's some kind of defensive kind of ideas arising, fantasies arising. It's kind of creating this heaviness and closing of the heart. Definitely a deficiency of kindness happening. There's a lot of self-judgment. I'm not really having a lot of compassion for this pain that's right there right now. You know, how is it that I can kind of stop giving fuel to some of the negative, unpleasant, unwholesome qualities? How can I cultivate a little bit more of the kindness, the compassion, self-directed compassion, overall kind of non-reactivity or neutrality of mind towards some of this unpleasant stuff? Yeah, so this is in a way what we're looking at in terms of cultivating a mature mindfulness. How is it that we can just be aware of this mind body experience, and just like the chef can kind of shift and change the ingredients, you know, we can have that capacity all kind of built into this faculty of awareness itself. Yeah, does that kind of make sense? Kind of bring it home a little bit why, you know, why it behooves us to kind of understand a little bit of the mental factors and have the skill sets of the shamatha. All right, let's calm this down. You know, I'm feeling some anger. I'm feeling some over activation. Okay, how can I calm myself down? Yeah? How can I have the insight to be able to kind of go into that, not tighten up, turn away, not repress, not use the disidentification as a spiritual bypass, but really go into and allow myself to fully feel, fully allow this emotion to express itself, however it wants to expand, contract, rise, fall, all the while having this capacity of a vaster sense of kindness and equanimity that can hold it in awareness as it begins to resolve itself. Yeah?
Michael,
Yes.
if it's appropriate, can you speak a little bit more to spiritual bypass? I find that it's a pretty interesting topic with some clients, where it kind of gets into what you were saying. It's like if they meditated as much as they talked about it. And I didn't know if that's connected to spiritual bypass.
Yeah. Well, there's, you know, it can take so many forms and expressions. I mean, you know, gosh, one individual comes to mind that I knew. She considered herself a highly spiritual being, and in a way just felt like she was above her emotions in a way. And her cat died that she was very, very close to for the longest time. And she was just kind of leaning into this identification of, oh, I'm above my emotions. And, you know, I'm so happy that the cat has transitioned to the 12th house. You know, and just by identifying with this aspect of her identity, she was just kind of repressing her emotions. So that's one expression of a spiritual bypass. How I see it sometimes within the Buddhist context, that's quite real. And unfortunately, you know, something that we see, you know, so many teachers from way back when up to current day, they come out as teachers and they build themselves as deeply realized individuals, and they engage in horrendous activity, sexual misconduct, manipulation of students, manipulation of, you know, fraudulence in their financial affairs, or taking advantage of their spiritual communities. What the hell is going on with them? So there, you know, I can see how there can be this, you know, a lot of personal suffering that's going on, that if they're going right to, oh, I'm just going to break my identification from it, but that's just the sensation, and I can go to the no self of it. You know, that's a way in which there can still be this whole kind of quantum pocket of unresolved material that really they just haven't addressed psychologically. They haven't just gone into sat down with the clinician and said, you know what, this is screwed up. This has happened to me and I'm doing this and this is weird. This is wrong. I need to take care of this. This teacher, Culadasa, Mind Illuminated, excellent book. People are aware of it. He has this one way of talking that I like, when he says, you know, our job is to wake up, clean up, and grow up. Yeah. So a lot of the spiritual path is like, oh, let's wake up. And when we wake up and have some degree of enlightenment or awakening, we're good. So, you know, this other model is, no, we're not good. We can have a lot of spiritual awakening and have a lot of decrease of suffering and so a lot of these spiritual skills that I've been spotlighting tonight. But there can be a lot of cleaning up that we need to take some of these tools and direct it towards in a way that's mature, and a way that really is real in terms of how we show up as a human being to ourselves and our relationships, for sure. So waking up does not necessarily mean we're cleaned up or that we've sufficiently grown up. So I think that it's something that on superficial levels of spiritual practice by people overly identifying with an ideal and suppressing a lot of their own suffering to people that consider themselves very deeply realized, still have a lot of, they're unconscious to their own pain and suffering. That's why I think it's very, very important for anybody that bills themselves as a spiritual teacher to be able to take feedback. You know, I've seen this in a lot of spiritual communities, and maybe yourselves being adepts yourselves who've probably been in different communities. There's certain teachers, they just surround themselves with yes men, and they get into this echo chamber that tends to prop up and kind of, they co-sign on the teacher's BS. So a lot of times when I meet a teacher, I kind of might be I might try to poke their buttons a little bit, see how they respond, you know? And if they kind of get defensive or haughty, get on their high horse and say, okay, yeah, this person's got some work to do. That informs me how close I should kind of get involved with them or not. Maybe that's not the best thing to do, but I've found it's helped me not get very involved with a lot of narcissists and sociopaths that tend to be drawn towards becoming spiritual teachers, for sure. It's very prevalent.
Thank you.
Okay, so how about we do a little sitting practice? Okay. All right, so allowing yourself to come to a comfortable upright position. We'll be working with cultivating some shamatha and some metta. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. Settling into the body, allow yourself to find a place of relative comfort. When you do, get in contact with an intention to maintain stillness and posture. And settling in, can we settle into this quality of awareness? Whatever that brightness, aliveness in the mind and body is, however that makes sense or is relevant to you. Can we take this as the seat of our practice? So we can open up to this shamatha practice. The spirit of shamatha is whatever we are observing. Can we notice the calming qualities? It's been put otherwise. Can we notice the gladdening and balancing qualities? So this is why breath is a very popular object of focus for shamatha cultivation. So if you wish, if you're open to it, begin to bring your awareness towards the breath, anchoring your attention to a part of the body that actively is breathing, be that the nose, throat, lungs, or belly, and place your attention here. So not merely observing the dry entering and exiting of air, but what are some of the pleasant qualities available in the breath? On that in-breath, what may be available to you? For some, that might be a sense of a joy or somewhat of a pleasant hedonic tone. Maybe a certain pleasure of our oxygen needs being met. Just discern, notice what is available, and give yourself permission to feel it. It can be subtle, wispy, fleeting, that's fine. Just contact the positive on the in-breath. Then at top of the in-breath, as we are ending or coming near to the end of our inhaling, at its natural pace, and that natural pause that may be available before we exhale, is there anything distinctly different or available there that's pleasant or restful? Certain qualities of wakefulness, certain energy, fullness. Just discern, notice what's present at the top of the in-breath, and give yourself permission to feel it. And for the next few rounds, if you focus on the out-breath, what pleasant qualities may be available there? An inherent relaxation response, a relinquishing, a letting go, a settling, calming. Notice what it is for you. Give yourself permission to feel that. And then at the base of the out-breath, as the exhale comes to an end, there's a natural pause before we inhale. Don't push the breath so that it's uncomfortable. Just notice when you naturally arrive there. What's present? Acceptance, equanimity, contentment, peace. Again, it can be subtle, wispy, fleeting, that's fine. Just notice what's there and feel it. Allow it. So the gladdening and balancing. Whatever about us may be low energy or negative, unpleasant, we can lean into the gladdening factors. What are the pleasant qualities that are uplifting? We can focus or emphasize, attune to those. If we're a little frenetic and all over the place, maybe we need to settle down a bit. So we lean into the grounding, balancing qualities, usually available on that out breath, that help to settle. Just checking in with yourself. What do you need? A little bit more lightness and levity, or a little grounding and settledness? You may determine which side of the breath you might want to attune to more. So for some of us, it might help with the concentration. It might help to be a little deliberate about the practice. That is to say, what's available on each of those 4 stages of breath? And if you want, you can name it. So on my inhale, I experience joy. Top of the in-breath, I experience a wakefulness. On the out-breath, I experience a tranquility. The base of the out-breath, I experience a peace. So maybe as I am moving around and around that cycle of breath, I might use those labels to remind myself what I'm focusing, attuning to, and also reinforcing this idea of what I'm cultivating, what mental states I'm cultivating, the mental factors, Cetaskias I'm cultivating. So as I'm breathing, I may do a certain mantra or chant. It might sound like this: joy, wakeful, tranquil, peace. Joy, wakeful, tranquil, peace. And so on like that. I contact it, I label it, I feel it through, and move to the next moment. You can try that if you find it's helpful. Or you can just kind of hang out and just be with what arises. Okay, good. So that's just a little sample of engaging in shamatha practice and how that can lend itself towards cultivating wholesome and beautiful mental factors, Cetaskias. Now, if you want, you can let go of all labeling and discerning and just hang out with the breath, hang out with this mind-body experience. But notice, how are you responding to it? So moment by moment, what is it that you're in contact with? And what's the response? Do you want to tighten up, turn away? Is there aversion towards some things, craving towards others? So can you notice how you respond and maybe cultivate a particular response? For starters, whatever arises, can we just bring this sense of kindness towards it? How does that shift change color or flavor your experience by intentionally bringing kindness towards this breath body experience? As we've been cultivating some of these pleasant aspects of shamatha, if there's anything pleasant going on, can you meet that with a sense of an appreciation, an ability to feel joy from whatever is the pleasant experience you're noticing? When we contact something pleasant, it creates a sense of a joyful appreciation. That creates another pleasant moment. It can create this positive feedback loop when we have this appreciative joy response towards our experience. Anything that's unpleasant that's taking place, be it emotionally or unpleasantness of the mind or body, that willingness to open up, turn towards, bear witness to. Can we get in touch with something close to a compassionate response towards whatever's unpleasant in our experience? A willingness to feel through with kindness towards the unpleasant. And regardless of what arises, be it pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, can we have this sense of equanimity? Meet it with this openness, acceptance, non-resistance. Just a willingness to be deeply okay with whatever is. Okay, good. So taking that analogy of the chef or the baker tasting their soup or whatever culinary delight they have created. Can you taste this experience of mind body right now? Can you discern what it's made up of? Can you appreciate the shift or change you may have undergone from the different mental factors you've cultivated? And maybe different mental factors you might have let go of. Okay, at ease, everybody. Post-bell practice, allowing yourself to still stay open to receiving the merits of what you've generated. As we shift into a conversation. So what did you notice? What did you observe? What was relevant for you during the sit, the shamatha, the metta, self-directed metta, cultivating of the different mental factors, or anything about any of the material we covered tonight? Just feel free to.
It was such a different metta than I've kind of experienced before, and something I was able to do a lot easier than the statements that usually go with metta, or phrases that usually go with metta. And I was aware that I started out in a fairly agitated state based on stuff that happened, and was able to kind of watch it a little better, and it kind of reduced. But I wouldn't have thought of that as a metta piece.
Because, in what way?
I think of all the metta that's always usually done by various teachers as much more very specifically giving love and compassion and acceptance to yourself and to others. And this was much more less specific and kind of easier for me. Less words is better.
Yeah. Less words is better. So for sure, it's definitely working with the spirit of the law, less the letter of the law on metta. it's kind of, we're putting it through this Abhidhammic lens of, all right, how is it that we can contact, access, cultivate a metta intention, cultivating these particular flavors that's kind of directed towards our own sensory experience. And then how does that show up and influence the experience of the mental state? So I'm glad that you felt that you were able to access it and that it was a tangible experience for you, Robert.
Thanks, Mike.
It was really, yeah, I agree with Robert. It was a really good experience. I was also noticing how these mental factors that, I mean, they keep changing a little bit, like the intensity or focus or something, it keeps changing.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to notice that so much more this time.
Kind of the inherent impermanence of the mental factors, for sure.
Right.
And I wonder, you know, there's that inherent impermanence, but also, you know, that was let's say if we went for a longer time and concentration deepened, if there might have been a stabilizing of like a couple of those mental factors that really kind of took root and might become kind of a doorway to a particular flavor of samadhi. Okay, thank you, Swati.
I experienced, it's funny, it was like, I think there were some parts of the meditation where you were suggesting, not saying we had to, but like, you know, using words specifically, like tranquility and all that. And like, I don't know, I was realizing in my own practice, like at least right now, it's like, and it's about like kind of directly touching the actual physical. Like if I try to label things too much, it gets too cognitive and it's too in my head and I start spinning. So for me, I just trying to like really experience the feeling fully, and which is definitely, I think your metta instructions were like that, where it was about experiencing what metta is in the body. And that's the stuff that really resonates with me right now. And that was my experience. But actually, I have a question too that I was trying to ask earlier, but I don't know, everything was going so fast. But it was about trauma and meditation.
Yeah.
So I'm a master, I'm in a MSW program for a social work program in my second year. And I have this professor who always goes, she's like, you know what, meditation's contraindicated for trauma. And I kind of have some interest. I feel like I actually know where she's coming from, but I think that is like such a broad statement. Like all meditation is all contraindicated for all trauma is like just, and but it does bring up a really good point. And I think there's so many clinicians here, like, you know, when is meditation like not ideal? And for, especially like in what circumstances would you shy away? And for me, I think it's like building that safety. What I've heard is that if people are really experiencing things like PTSD or like kind of in the middle of their intense trauma, if you don't have a safe space with them, I could see how meditation could bring up more than they're ready to handle.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could touch on that a little.
Sure. No, I agree kind of everything that you were saying there. You know, for some people, some practices are definitely not appropriate. But you know, but people that have those blanket statements of it's contraindicated all meditation, it feels like, well, you know, there's so much of these kind of, you know, calming and self-soothing exercises that we would also find in other theoretical lenses and tools that would be used. That's also kind of like a meditation exercise too. So I don't agree that it's contraindicated, period, for everybody. But you know, there's the individuals where, let's just say, the moment that they just sit down, close their eyes, activation. You know, and I think you put your nail on it. You put your finger on it there. It's just like when they're getting in touch with something and it creates more activation than less, then it's good to back off and maybe circle around to some other ways of working. For some individuals, there's just that safety is just not there. The moment that they sit down and try to focus on breath or try to focus on relaxing, they have the opposite response where they just feel a flare up, feel overwhelmed. I think that's a thing that I really just look out for, is if anybody is feeling overwhelmed, period, maybe it's just too much to just be able to have any type of just being directly with their own experience, because it seems like there's such this freneticness of mind and this this lack of coordinating of their subjective experience, and this absolute kind of fear, aversion to their own subjective experience. You know, when all of those features are really salient, then yeah, breath ain't gonna be pleasant to them. Hanging out and sounding to be working for them. So, you know, whatever other skill sets you might have in your theoretical toolboxes that you work with might be good, until they can just have the distress tolerance to be able to just kind of sit and breathe. And then maybe there might be just a very slow kind of, all right, can we kind of get into that a little bit and just really watch their reaction. If it's just too much, then it's like, okay, cool, we can back out. No problem at all. Usually when, you know, I find when people have just such this hypertrophy of thought that is just creating such this hypertrophy of like strong negative emotional reaction. There's this kind of, this thought is creating this emotion, creating this thought, this emotion. There's this kind of figure eight eternity knot of suffering that's happening. It's like, all right, you know, we might need to work with some other ways for a while. But
Mike, I was saying, as I was saying before, this is one of the situations where I wonder if metta practices the love and the affection, practicing that instead of like a breath awareness or body awareness meditation would be one of the ways in which, and it doesn't even have to be always like sitting quietly and then focusing on the metta phrases. But to use these methods of creating these kind of mental factors, I guess, of loving kindness and compassion.
Like one place we worked at, there was a way to connect some of the clients with working at like an animal shelter, and the experience of just kind of like holding cats and dogs. And it's just like, oh wow, there's just such, you know, such a warm, yummy feeling of just holding a pet. And it's like, okay, can you be aware of that? You know, if it's difficult, or just generating metta is just impossible, because for some people, they've never experienced love. They've never experienced safety. You know, everything has been aversive, dangerous, threatening. So they just don't have that wired in. So maybe the experience of an external, oh, I'm holding an animal and just this cute little thing. It's like, oh, okay, are you aware of that? Can you remember that? That might be like just this one little moment of, oh, that was a joyful, soft, loving experience. And then we can say, oh, can you remember that? Can you remember what that felt like? And that might be kind of like the beaver building the dam. That's the first stick that's able to kind of get propped up in the river, and then kind of slowly begin to kind of like work off of that. So, you know, sometimes even when metta itself is not even available, to like have some sort of tangible outward metta experience that they can start to build even towards having metta towards self or others. But yeah, again, Swati, I think that's a good point. The metta sometimes might be one of the easier ways to enter in for people that are a little overly activated, overly challenged. Yeah. I know it's a longer, deeper conversation, but does that feel relevant, satisfactory to you, Lindsay?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it actually speaks to, like, I think a lot of us probably know, like, how mindfulness is such a big thing right now, and it's being taught by so many people who might not have this, like, you know, depth of knowledge and like nuance about what mindfulness really is. And it's very interesting to me. So yeah, that answered my question.
Yeah. And at the same time, you know, it's good to know the different ins and outs of mindfulness, so we can know like what things are do what. You know, that's why I like to really tease apart. This is insight. Insight, that's the inner excavation work. That can bring up a lot of stuff. My particular, my own experience, I started meditating very regularly and aggressively at 13 years of age, and I just delved right into insight practice without even really being aware of my own trauma, and it just activated all the trauma and it brought it up, and it was just a heavy price to pay for many years as a result. So that's another reason why now I very much am into like, all right, let's be aware of these three particular flavors that are all accessible within mindfulness. So when they teach, you know, the mindfulness-based stress reduction and stuff like that, that has all the metta, the insight, and the shamatha qualities in it. And some people might naturally gravitate towards the insight component. And if they don't have the ability to know how to bear down and when and how to back out, and when and how to self-soothe, then, you know, that could be problematic for sure. Okay, thank you, everybody. Sorry, I just took a look at the time. We're tipping over the hour, but I really appreciate everybody's kind of engaging the material, the questions and the conversation. You guys are super awesome. So again, Google Classroom, if anybody doesn't have that information available, you can reach out to me. Let's see, let me get my information together here. So let me give a quick, forgive my fumbling here. Where is it? Okay. So here's my personal information. If any questions, comments, hey, I need to get to the Google Classroom, or I couldn't share something, I didn't feel good about it in class, feel free to contact me. I feel ethically bound to support people with the information that I share. And again, the Google Classroom is there. It has links to the YouTube channel. And in the YouTube channel, if you go to that, there's also kind of a library of some of the morning practices that I do with people that specifically are shamatha, specifically metta, specifically vipassana. So if you're interested in using any of those resources for your own personal cultivation, please do. And also, if anybody is interested, okay, forgive me, I got all these different links and stuff like that. Okay, here we go, my morning meditation. That's a Zoom-based morning meditation, happens specific time, 9 to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday. So there's a Zoom link there for anybody that's interested in that. Copy paste that to a document that can hold that. That's Dana-based, so as with all that we do here, these teachings are freely offered. Nobody is turned away for a lack of funds. I know that Inside LA is having their own difficulties, as everybody is, during this time of economic instability and insecurity of 2020. And if you have the ability to donate towards their well-being, that would be appreciated to keep these programs alive for us all to connect with. All right, so let's end with the dedication of merit. By the merits of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain a liberation for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who have come before us on the path, and to those who come after us on the path. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful
Thank you.
week. Hope to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.